I never thought I'd say these words out loud. But I went to hell, and I'm here to tell you what I saw. I was a model. I had everything on the outside: beauty, success, attention. But deep inside, I was lost. And one day, everything changed. What I'm about to share isn't a dream. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. The pain, the darkness, the screams. I felt it all. And I don't want anyone else to go there. Stories like mine aren't just emotional, they're a warning. Because hell is real, and too many are walking straight into it, without even knowing. That's why you need to hear this. To open your eyes. To wake up. To escape, before it's too late. My story might scare you, but if it leads you to the truth, then it's worth it. You see, on the outside, my life seemed perfect. I had fame, money, and people cheering my name. But inside, I felt this horrible emptiness, like a black hole swallowing me whole. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, that emptiness kept growing, until it finally led me to a place of unimaginable darkness, a place where I faced my worst mistakes and felt what it truly means to be far from God. But even in that hopelessness, something incredible happened. God's love reached me. He pulled me out of the pit and gave me another chance, a chance to live with purpose. That's why I'm here today, sharing my story, because what I learned could change your life. If you're looking for hope and need a second chance, this story is for you. And before you start, don't forget to subscribe, because here you'll find more stories like this that could change your life. My name is Anne, and I grew up in a humble little town called High Hills. My mom, Susan, raised me with strong values. Every night, she'd remind me to pray before bed, thanking God for what we had, even when it wasn't much. Every Sunday, we'd go to church, and I believed life had a clear purpose: love God and be kind to others. But when I turned 18, things took a turn. I had grown tall, thin, and people often said I had a face meant for the cameras. One day, while I was helping my mom sell tamales in the town square, a man approached us. He claimed to be a modeling agent and said I had a bright future ahead. My mom didn't trust him. She warned me to stay away. But the idea of leaving our life of struggle behind, well, it felt like a dream come true. Soon, I was modeling in small shows for local stores. Then came bigger campaigns, and before I knew it, I was on the covers of top magazines in Mexico. The cameras adored me, designers fought to work with me, and invitations to exclusive parties kept pouring in. My life became a whirlwind of luxury: designer clothes, 5-star hotels, and expensive cars. On the outside, everything sparkled. But inside, my soul was growing darker. I stopped going to church. There was always something more important to do. My mom would say, "And don't let success pull you away from God. Remember who gave you your talents." But I ignored her. I thought that advice was for people who didn't understand how the real world works. I was embarrassed to talk about my faith, like it didn't fit in with the world of fame and fortune. Pride started to take over my heart. I began looking down on others, thinking I was better than them. I stopped visiting my mom, stopped calling my family. I told myself they wouldn't understand my new lifestyle, that we weren't the same anymore. My life was full of parties, expensive jewelry, and exotic vacations. But along with all that came temptations I wasn't prepared for. Alcohol, drugs, they were everywhere. My so-called friends would say, "Relax, Anne. Enjoy life, you have everything people dream of." And I believed them. I convinced myself I was living the dream. But at night, when I was alone in those massive hotel rooms, I felt a crushing emptiness. It didn't make sense. I had everything, right? Yet when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. Sure, my face was flawless for the cameras, but my soul? It was broken, forgotten, and empty. I remember one day, right before a big fashion show, an older woman stopped me on the street. She grabbed my hand and said, "Daughter, God has a purpose for you, but you're not listening." I laughed. I thought she was just another religious fanatic. But deep down, her words stuck with me, because I knew she was right. Still, I kept pushing forward in my career. With every step I took toward success, I felt like I was drifting further from God. I became obsessed with my image. Everything revolved around how I looked and what others thought of me. The higher I climbed in the modeling world, the further I fell from the peace I once had. I didn't even realize what I was losing: my family, my peace, my relationship with God. I thought I was in control, but in reality, I was spiraling straight toward the darkest experience of my life. Let me take you there. Imagine the bright runway lights, the deafening applause, the cameras flashing non-stop. On the surface, it seemed like I had it all. But I had no idea that I was about to face the most terrifying darkness imaginable. I was still and walking down the runway with my head held high, acting like I had everything under control. The cameras flashed, capturing my every step, and designers would rush to hug me afterward, saying, "You were the star of the night." On the outside, I looked like someone who had it all. But the truth? Deep inside, I was shattered. Every night, when the lights faded and I returned to my hotel room, the silence was unbearable. Moments earlier, the applause had filled me with pride, but now it vanished like smoke. I'd sit on my bed, surrounded by luxury, a minibar full of expensive drinks, designer dresses hanging neatly, and jewelry sparkling on the vanity. Yet none of it could fill the emptiness I felt. It was like a dark hole inside me, and no amount of fame, money, or parties could make it go away. I kept asking myself, why do I feel this way? I had million-dollar contracts, trips to exotic places, and friends that others would envy. But deep down, I knew those friends didn't care about me, they cared about what I represented. They wanted connections, fame, or a photo with, and the model. None of them wanted me. That loneliness crushed me. And instead of facing it, I ran. I found my escape at parties. The noise, the music, the endless laughter, it was all a perfect distraction. But if you stopped for even a second to really look around, you'd see the truth. Everyone wore fake smiles, hiding the same emptiness I felt. Drinks flowed like water, and I didn't hold back. Each glass of alcohol was like a bandage for my broken heart. For a few hours, I could forget. But the next day, the emptiness returned, stronger than before. That's when things got worse. I remember the first time someone offered me drugs. A so-called friend smiled and said, "This will help you relax." I knew it was wrong, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to fill that emptiness, even if it meant destroying myself. That first time turned into many more. Each drink, each party, each bad decision was a desperate attempt to patch the hole in my soul. But nothing worked. Meanwhile, my mom, Susan, kept trying to reach me. She'd call, leave messages, and always say the same thing. "Daughter, don't forget God. He's the one who gave you everything you have." But I didn't want to hear it. I'd make excuses to hang up or ignore her messages. Deep down, I knew she was right, but I couldn't face it. How could I turn to God after all I'd done? My relationships were a disaster too. I kept getting involved with people who only wanted to use me. One man, a wealthy businessman, ended things in the worst way possible. He went to the media and told lies about me, humiliating me in public. Instead of defending myself, I just hid. I felt worthless, like I had nothing left. Behind the glamorous life I had built, I was falling apart. There were nights I'd cry myself to sleep, hugging a pillow in that cold, empty room. I wanted to scream, but who would listen? I had pushed God away, and the friends I had weren't real. I remember once sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone, staring at all the numbers, but knowing none of those contacts could help me. I felt like a stranger in my own life, a perfect face in the mirror, but with empty eyes staring back at me. Then came the moment that changed everything. One night, I received a voicemail from my mom. Her voice was trembling, like she'd been crying. She said, "En, I'm praying for you every day. I don't know what you're going through, but I know you're not okay. Please, come back to God before it's too late." I played that message over and over again. Every word felt like a hammer, breaking my heart. I didn't admit it then, but something inside me had started to crack. Instead of reaching out for help, I sank deeper. I convinced myself that more parties, more relationships, and more fame would somehow fix me. But the emptiness kept growing, like I was stumbling through a desert, desperate for water but looking in all the wrong places. I was too proud to admit it, too stubborn to see that the emptiness was there because I had pushed God out of my life. Looking back now, I know He was calling me, even in my worst moments. But back then, I was too blind to see it. That's when I made a choice that would change my life forever. It was a sunny afternoon when I decided to take a trip to Acapulco. I had just finished an exhausting photo shoot and convinced myself I deserved a break. I told myself that a weekend at the beach, full of parties, music, and distractions, would finally silence that emptiness inside me. I grabbed my keys and got into my car, a luxury vehicle I had just bought, a symbol of everything I thought I'd achieved. I didn't know then that this trip would change my life forever. I sped down the highway, windows down, feeling the warm air rush past my face. Music blasted through the speakers, songs I always played to hype myself up. Behind me, a car full of my friends followed close, laughing over the phone as we planned the party-filled weekend ahead. I had no idea that the path I was on was leading me straight to disaster. I felt unstoppable, like nothing bad could ever happen to me. I was young, successful, and living the life I had always dreamed of. But I had no idea how wrong I was. As I sped down the highway, the road's curves became tighter and more dangerous. The sun was setting, and a thin fog began to spread across the horizon, but I didn't slow down. My mind was too busy thinking about the party that awaited me. At one point, I grabbed my phone to change the song. Just for a second. That's all it took. In that brief moment, everything spun out of control. My car swerved violently, slipping out of my lane. I panicked, yanking the steering wheel, but the tires skidded across the wet pavement. I tried to brake, but the wheels kept spinning. I screamed, but no one could hear me. The car spun faster, and suddenly I was no longer on the road. My car flew off the highway, crashing down a steep, tree-covered slope. The sound of metal twisting and glass shattering was deafening. Then, silence. A terrifying, heavy silence. I couldn't move. My hands shook uncontrollably, and a sharp pain shot through my body. I tried to open my eyes, but all I could see were blurred shadows and flashes of light. My breathing slowed, and I felt like my life was slipping away. That's when I heard her voice, my mother's voice. "Daughter, please come back to God before it's too late." Tears rolled down my face, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen, helpless. The ambulance arrived what felt like hours later, though I was later told it had only been minutes. Paramedics carefully pulled me from the wreckage, but by then, I was barely conscious. I remember flashes, the blinding lights of the ambulance, paramedics' voices saying my condition was critical, and the wailing sirens. Then, nothing. I didn't just pass out. This wasn't sleep. It was a cold, suffocating darkness, a darkness unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was heavy, like it was pressing down on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. Before we continue, if this message is blessing your life, don't forget to like the video. I felt like I was falling, not physically, but like my very soul was being ripped away, dragged into some terrible place. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped, surrounded by an overwhelming sense of fear and despair. That's when I realized I wasn't in this world anymore. I had crossed a line, stepped into something far worse than I ever imagined. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in a hospital room. There were no bright lights, no nurses or doctors. Instead, I found myself in a place that words can barely describe. It was dark, but not like night or a room with no lights. This darkness felt alive, as if it had weight, like it was pressing down on me, trying to crush me. There was no solid ground beneath me, yet I wasn't floating either. I was trapped in some kind of void. The air was thick and burning hot. Every breath hurt, and there was no way out. Then from the silence, I heard it, a scream. It wasn't just a cry of pain, it was deeper, raw, filled with a hopelessness that made my skin crawl. More screams followed, each one worse than the last. I looked around and saw shadowy figures moving in the distance. Some were hunched over, as if carrying invisible weights. Others were chained, pulling and struggling to break free, but the chains weren't just wrapped around their bodies. They seemed to cling to their very souls, holding them in endless torment. Then I saw faces I recognized. Jorge, a photographer I had worked with many times. He had always bragged about not believing in anything, living only for pleasure. Now he was kneeling, chains wrapped around him like snakes. His face was twisted in agony, and his eyes were empty, filled with nothing but despair. I tried to call out to him, but no words came. My voice didn't exist in that place. I moved, or at least I think I did, and saw someone else. Katerine, a model I had competed with for years. We had always fought for the best contracts, the biggest shows. I wasn't surprised to see her there, but what I saw broke my heart. She was trapped in a circle of fire, flames surrounding her, yet never consuming her. She reached out desperately, her hands clawing at the air as if searching for a way out, for some kind of salvation. She screamed, but no one came. Then I heard it, voices rising above the screams. "Forgive me, Lord. Please, get me out of here." The cries echoed endlessly, weaving together like a twisted chorus of regret and agony. I wanted to close my ears, to run, to escape. But there was no escape. The heat was unbearable. It wasn't like standing too close to a fire, it was something far worse. My skin, though no longer physical, seemed to burn from the inside out. It wasn't just a sensation on the surface. This fire penetrated the deepest parts of my being, igniting every painful memory, every regret, and every wrong decision I had ever made. The flames seemed to expose my soul itself, leaving me defenseless against the overwhelming agony. As I stumbled forward through this place of torment, I saw something that made my heart freeze. A figure was approaching, difficult to recognize at first, but when our eyes met, I knew exactly who it was. It was Daniel, a man with whom I had shared a toxic relationship. He always claimed he didn't need anyone, not friends, not family, and certainly not God. "The world is mine," he would say. Now, his arrogance was gone. He was covered in what looked like ash, his hands desperately clawing at the chains that bound him. The sight of his face broke me. His eyes were hollow, filled with a pain so profound that it seemed to cut deeper than physical torment. It was the face of someone who knew they were condemned, with no hope, no way out, and no chance of redemption. But then I realized something even more horrifying. I wasn't just watching this place. Something was watching me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, a presence, vile and consuming, radiating pure evil. It wasn't just observing, it was waiting for me. It wanted me to fall deeper into that abyss, a chasm that seemed to stretch endlessly below me. Each step I took brought me closer to it. The screams around me intensified, the heat scorched my soul, and the darkness pressed in like a suffocating weight. In that moment, I knew exactly where I was. This was hell, the very place I had mocked and ignored all my life. And now I knew that I didn't belong to myself anymore. I was powerless, trapped in a place with no way out. But then, in the midst of that overwhelming despair, a faint light appeared in the distance. It wasn't like the searing flames of hell. This light was gentle yet powerful, warm yet not scorching. And with that light came a voice, not a scream, but a voice that carried undeniable authority. The moment it spoke, everything froze. The heat, the noise, even the chains seemed to lose their grip on reality. But the darkness remained, as if waiting for something. The voice called me by name. The way it said my name was unlike anything I had ever experienced, filled with tenderness, yet piercing to the core of my being. It was as if that voice knew me, every wound, every sin, every moment of regret. "This is not your final hour," the voice declared. I wanted to respond, to cry out, but I couldn't. My heart swelled with both reverent fear and an unexpected flicker of hope. "You have one last chance," the voice continued. "A chance to change and fulfill the mission I have entrusted to you." A mission? For me? After everything I had done? I couldn't understand how someone like me deserved another chance. Yet the light moved closer, surrounding me, and I felt its warmth penetrate every corner of my soul. The guilt, the pain, the overwhelming despair that had crushed me moments before, it all began to lift. It was as if the light was peeling away the scars left by my life of rebellion and sin. "Listen," the voice said again. "I'm not finished with you. You still have a purpose, but you must return with a new heart. Remember what you have seen here, and warn others." As the light enveloped me fully, the suffocating heat of hell vanished. In its place was a warmth that brought comfort, like being wrapped in the embrace of someone who had long been waiting for me to come home. For the first time, I felt true peace, a peace that whispered to me that no matter how far I had fallen, I was not beyond the reach of His mercy. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything changed. I felt a force pulling me back, as if I were being drawn upward, away from that dreadful place. In an instant, my eyes opened, and I found myself in a hospital bed. Machines beeped steadily beside me, and the fluorescent lights above seemed painfully bright. My body was weak, my muscles ached, and I felt like I had been asleep for a lifetime. Beside me, I heard a whisper, faint yet familiar. I turned my head with difficulty and saw her, my mother, kneeling at my bedside. Her hands were clasped tightly in prayer, and tears streamed down her face. Each word she whispered seemed to come from the depths of her soul. When she noticed I was awake, her eyes widened in disbelief and joy. "Thank God, my girl, you're alive," she cried, carefully wrapping her arms around me. I couldn't speak, but tears poured down my face. I remembered everything, the darkness, the suffering souls, the voice that had called me back. I knew I wasn't here by chance. God had given me a second chance. The following days were spent recovering in the hospital, but my mind remained restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those tormented souls. I remembered Daniel, Jorge, Catarine, their suffering etched into my memory. The cries for mercy still echoed in my ears. But I also remembered the light, and the voice that had saved me. One afternoon, with my mother sitting beside me, I gathered the courage to say what weighed on my heart. I took her hand and whispered, "Mom, forgive me." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You have nothing to be forgiven for, daughter," she replied gently. "But I knew better. I abandoned you," I said through tears. "I ignored you. I walked away from God. Forgive me for everything." She held me tightly, her own tears mixing with mine. "God is good, Maria," she said. "He's always been waiting for you, and so have I." When I was finally discharged, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't return to my old life. My modeling career, the contracts, the fame, the luxurious lifestyle, I left it all behind. It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't walk that path anymore. Those things had pulled me away from God, and I couldn't let them take me back. I returned home and found the Bible my mother had always left on my shelf, the one I had ignored for so many years. As I held it in my hands, I knew that this time, I wouldn't ignore it anymore. That night, I picked up the Bible with trembling hands and began to read. At first, I struggled to understand everything, but it felt as though each word had been written specifically for me. Hours passed as I read, underlined verses, cried and prayed. It was as if God Himself was speaking to me, guiding me step by step toward the life I was meant to live. My mother and I started attending church together. The first time I walked through those doors, I felt a mix of shame and relief. I quietly took a seat in the last row, keeping my head down as the pastor spoke about forgiveness and God's grace. It felt as though every word was aimed directly at me. When the service ended, I approached the altar and knelt down. I barely managed to say a few words, but I wept like never before. I asked God to forgive me, to guide me, and to use me for His purpose. In that moment, I felt a warmth in my chest, a deep certainty that He had heard me. From that day forward, my life changed completely. I no longer cared about the opinions of others, about luxury, or about fame. My focus was on rebuilding my relationship with God and seeking forgiveness from those I had hurt. I reached out to old friends, apologized to those I had mistreated, and began sharing what I had experienced. It wasn't easy. Every step required courage, but with each act of repentance and reconciliation, I felt closer to the peace that only God can provide. Today, my days are filled with prayer, Bible study, and serving in the church. I dedicate myself to helping young people who, like me, once chased after things that only left them empty. I tell them my story, not to frighten them, but to reveal the greatness of God's love. A love so powerful that it can reach us even in the darkest of places. I knew my purpose now, to warn others, to guide them, and to show that no matter how far we've fallen, there is always hope in Him. When I first started sharing my story, I wondered, who would want to listen to me? How can I talk about God when I spent so long running from Him? But every time I prayed, I felt His answer in my heart, "Speak, I will be with you." My first invitation came from a small church in my city. The pastor, a friend of my mother, asked me to share my testimony during a service. My hands trembled as I walked up to the pulpit. I looked at the congregation, faces filled with curiosity and expectation, and took a deep breath. I began to speak. I told them everything, how I had abandoned God in pursuit of fame, how I had been consumed by pride and vanity, how I had fallen into hell, and finally, how His love had rescued me. As I spoke, I saw tears streaming down people's faces. Some nodded as though my words touched their own lives. When I finished, Several people approached me to thank me for sharing my story. That day, I realized that my testimony wasn't just my story, it was a tool God was using to reach others. From then on, invitations kept coming, to small churches, large auditoriums, even open-air gatherings in public squares. Sometimes I spoke to hundreds of people, other times to just a handful. But the size of the audience didn't matter. Each time I shared my story, I knew I was fulfilling the purpose God had given me. One of the most impactful moments happened in Monterey. While speaking in a plaza, I noticed a young man who seemed distracted, almost disinterested. But as I spoke about the emptiness I had felt while far from God, his expression changed. He lifted his head and listened intently. Afterward, he approached me and said, "I felt like you were speaking directly to me. I've been drifting away from God, but I want to change." In that moment, I knew that every word, every effort, had been worth it. God also opened doors in the media. I was invited to radio shows and online interviews to share my experience. I took every opportunity to warn about the dangers of living far from God, but more importantly, to share the message of hope and redemption. I reminded people that no matter how far they had fallen, they could always return to the arms of the Father. It wasn't an easy road. There were critics, people who claimed that my past disqualified me from speaking about God. But each time I doubted, I remembered what I had experienced, the voice that had called me out of hell, and the lives that were being transformed by my testimony. My mission was not to seek approval from others, it was to obey God. Today, I continue traveling throughout Mexico, visiting churches, plazas, schools, any place where I can share my story. I carry with me a Bible, the memory of my experience, and a heart willing to serve. My message is always the same. God is waiting with open arms. No matter how far you've strayed or how deeply you've fallen, His love is enough to restore you and give you a new life. This mission hasn't only changed the lives of others, it continues to transform mine. Every time I see someone accept Christ, every time someone tells me that my story inspired them to seek God, I feel a joy that surpasses anything I've ever experienced. I have found my purpose, the greatest purpose anyone can have, to serve God and bring hope to others. That was my story. But now I want to speak to you. If you've ever felt lost, empty, or far from God, know this: it's never too late to return to Him. No matter how far you've fallen, His love is greater than any mistake. I know this because I've seen it. I've felt it. Today, I'm a living witness that His mercy can transform even the most broken life. If you're here listening to me now, this isn't by chance. It's a call, an invitation to open your heart and allow Him to work in your life. Because if God could rescue me, He can rescue you too. And now I want to know, what do you think about this story? Have you ever felt lost or distant from God? Leave a comment below. Together, we can reflect, share, and find hope.